Hey guys, and welcome to the Alabama Saltwater Fishing Report, the first podcast to bring you the local fishing report, whether it's good, bad, or ugly. Today I'm co-hosting with Captain Patrick Garmison, Ugly Fishing, and we are on location in Orlando, Florida at ICAST 2019, the world's largest sport fishing expo. Patrick, my plane just touched down a couple hours ago, and we walked in, and this thing just seems like it gets bigger and bigger every year.
It's a monster.
It is. It's cool though. There's a lot of businesses that are supported by the fishing industry, and it really brings it full frontal whenever you come in here and you look around. You're like, dang. I mean, this is a huge facility, completely slam full of businesses who are employing people, who are paying taxes. I mean, when you think about the impact that managing our fisheries, and, you know, we talk a lot on here about which fish to maybe think about releasing and trying to take care of the resource. There's a lot of money involved in making sure our fish stocks stay healthy.
Yeah. I mean, well, not only that, but what you were talking about with the amount of people that are exposed to this. I noticed at the hotel when at one point I was walking out and it was just the whole entire room in the lobby is just full of people. I'm like, man, all these people are making a living based on fishing.
Yeah.
It's a really cool experience to be in the epicenter of the fishing world right now. And
well, I'm not going to sit here and say that everybody here is in a good mood, but the vast majority of the people here are following their passion, and they've built a business or are trying to build a business around something that they love doing, you know, being fishing, and they just want to be involved in that industry. That's one of the great things. I mean, you know, kind of get off on the soapbox here, but one of the great things about living in America is that you've got the ability. There is a product out there for anything you can imagine, and next year there'll be something that you could never have imagined. And there's some guy who's, you know, being supported by that, and he's supporting employees, which is supporting their families.
That's right.
It's just a cool experience to come here and see that, and just, I don't know, man. Really awesome event. So,
yeah, and it's all focused around recreational fishing and professional fishing, and it's not about commercial fishing and the harvesting of fish. It's really vast majority of it is just about the art of fishing.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited about today's show. We're going to be talking about what's going on along the Alabama Gulf Coast, but later on ICAST, we're going to get some folks in here and get some future episodes recorded.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that. Tell me a little bit about what's been going on with you. I was able to take last week off. That's the first time I've truly taken a week off in about 3 years, and man, it was so much fun. We just every day we were either in the water or fishing. And we caught some nice triple tail, caught some nice red snapper.
I saw that. I saw.
We had
You actually caught fish when you went out.
Yeah, I actually caught fish, and I actually got to get my wife out on the water,
That's
which is
good.
With an 18-month-old, that's something that you don't get to do a whole lot. But we had babysitters lined up. I never thought babysitter would be like part of the tackle box.
Yeah, it is definitely part of the tackle box now.
How was your week?
It was good. Spent 4th of July, that whole weekend, we chased red snapper and had a lot of fun doing it. Now I was messaging with a buddy of mine, and I said something about I was focusing on red snapper, hadn't really been in the trout world, and he said easy money. I said, well, it is easy to locate red snapper. It's typically easy to catch them, but all the work that I put into it with all the hooks and the line and the extra tackle and the weights and cast netting pogies, is that going to be easy? Is it not? At the end of the day, I always feel like it was a lot more work than inshore fishing. I have a lot of fun because the red snapper bite is fun. People that don't get to experience it a lot, when you drop a bait down, hold it for 3 seconds or 10 seconds, and then all of a sudden it's about to get snatched out of your hand, is a lot of fun, because I had some folks from Louisiana who had never actually snapper fished, and they were just blown away by how much fun it was. So we had a lot of fun doing that, and then on Monday I had my last charter before coming down here to ICAST, and the goal was actually to catch triple tail, which we saw triple tail in the Gulf, we saw them in the Bay all week leading up to this guy who specifically requested a triple tail, and I failed. failed miserably. But we did find a
That's
really
the way
good.
it goes.
We did find a really good trout bite, both specks and big white trout over in Grand Bay. We caught some in Portersville. And the water was not great. That west-northwest wind had it a little bit muddy, but the bite was on. It was shallow, and I mean, we poled down and caught a pile of fish, and then looked at every single crab trap from Grand Bay through Portersville Bay, through Heron Bay, all the way back over to Fort Morgan. Never saw a fish on any pots anywhere. Dropped my folks off at Fort Morgan. Went back to Weeks Bay where I launched the boat, ran across the Triple Tail, just hanging out on top of the water on the way back to Weeks Bay.
Of course you did.
Yeah, I didn't catch them though. I wanted to just throw rocks at them.
I wish I knew more about the science of triple tail, but it does seem, anecdotally, it seems like when there's a lot of fish in the sound, there's not as many fish in the middle of the bay, and vice versa. Last week, it seemed like there was more fish in the middle of the bay than there were in the sound. I fished both places and definitely caught more fish in the bay. One thing, we talked on here a couple weeks ago about the advantage or disadvantages of having a tower. And last week, that tower came in, like it really shined through with the triple tail fishing. We were able to get up, and all the fish we caught were on floating debris. We didn't catch any fish on channel markers or crab pot buoys or anything like that. It was all on floating debris. And what was interesting was we have a second helm in our tower, so we're able to control the throttle and control the steering up there. But the helm went out, so I had steering, but I didn't have a throttle. So what I did was I was in the tower controlling the steering and looking, and I had some other folks on the deck controlling the throttle.
Oh, that's interesting.
But also looking.
Yeah. And
I was seeing stuff way before they ever saw stuff, and seeing stuff they weren't seeing.
Yeah.
And it was, put it this way, without a tower, we wouldn't have caught most of the triple tail that we did catch, unless we had just run right up on top of those fish.
Oh, it extends your range of what you can see. So, I mean, a lot of times I'm running, and even on slick calm, glass calm conditions, I'm usually not seeing stuff until it's almost within casting distance, and you're probably seeing stuff 100 yards, 150, 200 yards away.
Yeah, enough time to think about your approach, to think about the current, to think about the wind, to drop a trolling motor in and, cut your engine off. Not that that's necessarily important all the time, but it doesn't hurt anything to be a little more stealthy.
And earlier last week, Monday or Tuesday, I was out. It got real calm in the sound, and we kind of eased around, and we found a board, and it had one triple tail on it. We hooked it, and the line broke. It was just, I don't know, it was frayed or
Captain,
something. So anyway, bad knot. It came back curly-cued. Got it, put another hook on, and I was like, all right, well, that was the only fish I saw on the board. And then I turn around, and there's 3 fish on the board.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, where did they come from? I mean, we were still within 20 feet of the board. Yeah. So put a hook on, put a bait on, throw it back over there. And 2 of them just go over there, look at it, and go back to the board. They didn't show any interest in the shrimp or the float or anything. There were enough interest to where they came off of the board, but then they went back. And then finally we hooked one, landed it. It was the same one we had already hooked. We got the hook back. He was a little bit undersized.
Not the brightest triple tail.
Not the brightest guy. But yeah, and then as soon as we caught that one and actually took him out of the water, put him back, the other 2 took off. We never saw them again.
Yeah, we caught 5 off of a floating piece of grass that was no bigger than a trash can lid. And that's another thing. A lot of folks are just getting into it, and they think you got to find like a tree trunk out there or something, man. Every floating catfish I saw, I was looking for a triple tail because they're laying underneath. It's mind-boggling that a 10-pound, 8 or 10-pound triple tail will try to lay his head underneath a 2-pound gaff topsail. But they will. Well, you got to look for everything.
Now, what do you think? I'm still really a novice at triple tail fishing because my typical method is drive around from one trout fishing area or one red fishing area to kind of weaving, looking, and if I see something, I slow down and take a look, and that's kind of my typical deal. But you mentioned about a lot of it, the fish were following stuff that was floating as opposed to fixed structure. That's one thing I have noticed. It seems like the hotter the water gets, which it was really hot this week, it got up to like 90 and 91 degrees, that those fish tend to be more on the stuff that's kind of floating and not fixed. I mean, do you find that there's any pattern to that,
I mean, every triple tail guy likes to think that there's more to triple tail fishing than there is, and that we're special.
Yeah.
But man, I'm like a conditions guy, like the way y'all are with trout. Is like when it slicks off and there's like, think of it this way: when it's super hot and the water's glass slick, the last thing I want to be doing is sitting still.
Yeah.
So I go away from fishing structure that's stationary, and I run the boat because I want the breeze, but I also want to look for stuff, and that's the best conditions to look for stuff.
Yep.
So I think a lot of times, like, well, we caught them on a tide line today, or we caught them on a floating piece of debris. I think a lot of that is just because we were fishing floating debris or fishing tide lines as opposed to fishing structure because the conditions allowed us to do that.
Yeah, you made it more of a point to just cover water and look for stuff.
Is there a pattern? Probably, but I wish I was that smart.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm not. All right, man. Well, let's get into this thing. It's getting close, Patrick. This week's show is brought to us by the Alabama Deep Sea Fishing Rodeo, July 19th through the 21st, next weekend. And the Roy Martin Young Anglers Tournament, July 13th. That's this weekend coming up. Rodeo Open competition is $50 per angler, and there are additional jackpot competitions for big game, king mackerel, red snapper, and speckled trout. Tickets are available online at Fishing Chaos, who we just stopped by their booth here at ICAST. Those guys doing big things. FishingChaos.com, and will be available at the following retail outlets: Academy Sports and Outdoors, Blue Water Ship Stores, Greer's Market in Fowl River, Howell and Associates Insurance, J&M Tackle, Quint's Hardware and Sporting Goods, Pronto Pond Theodore, and Tackle This, Shoot That. All right, I want everybody to come down to the rodeo site because we got a cool thing planned this year. We're going to have killer docks set up.
I heard.
And we're going to have the Alabama Saltwater Fishing Report Killer Dock Fish Cleaning Station. We're going to be cleaning fish all weekend long and videoing it, and we're gonna have some shirts. So y'all come down and see us, get a shirt. We're gonna be doing. You've seen our fish cleaning videos. You've been a part of the Sheep's Head video. Richard Rutland's a part of the cobia cleaning video. We're gonna be getting a lot of that video content and creating a lot more of those videos coming up. So I'm excited about that weekend. It's gonna be hot, but we're going to have the shade from the killer dock, and we're going to go talk to Bubba Blade or somebody like that here in a minute. Maybe we get a fillet knife or something to use in the videos. But I'm excited about the rodeo this year. Let's get into the reports and see what's going on for this weekend. I know we got a lot of weather. All right, let's head offshore, get that offshore report from Angelo DiPaola. Angelo, man, I hear you had a big win on a nice yellowfin tuna. Tell me a little bit about it.
Man, we had a great weekend. We fished Pensacola International. We ended up top money boat, second place top boat overall, first place tuna. We had 170-pound tuna. Just kind of a bite out on the weed line, but we were able to locate some fish, and it was just like almost if you've been out there and offshore fishing out trolling this year, you've noticed that there's a lot of scattered grass. So, like, when you find yourself in that situation, certain lure head styles work better than others for shedding that stuff. And the other thing is sometimes a little bit more speed kind of helps shake that grass off of your lure so you're not constantly reeling stuff in all the time. So we were able to do that. We caught a nice blue marlin off the Ursa. And then the last day of fishing on Saturday, we found a grass line. And, heck, I hadn't hardly found a grass line this year that's had a bunch of current, and this one was the same way. Line, no current. Typically, that's slow fishing, and that's kind of what we experienced, at least trolling. There seemed to be a lot of schooly dolphin out there. Anyways, it's just, a big hole in the water and screaming 80 wide, ended up in a big tuna. But like one of the things, and this is one of the things that I used to keep under my belt, was kind of like how we rig our stuff, especially if we're trolling a little bit faster. typically if you're trolling an islander kind of bait, or even Moldcraft makes some really good baits that you can put a ballyhoo behind, then when you rig them that way, you're not supposed to fish them with a J hook in a tournament. It's a federal mandate. And the other thing is, like, if you're going to step your troll speed up, and there's several reasons for it. The grass situation, but like if you're trolling at 7.5 knots and I'm trolling at 9 knots, and the name of the game is to cover ground. The more ground you can cover, the more likely you are to catch a fish. Well, if I'm able to cover more ground than you are, I'm more likely to run across some fish. So there's some advantages to that. Problem is, if you like trolling ballyhoo, you can't troll them at 9 knots that long before you start having bait wash out. So a few years ago, when they mandated the circle hook dead bait fishery, we decided to start trolling grubs behind our islanders and our mold crafts just to see how it worked. And we've experimented since then on what kind of tail situation. And I actually if you go on Google it, you can go Google Boneyard Baits. It's actually a company out of Coleman, Alabama. They make 11-inch halibut grubs, and they sell them to basically tackle shops up in the Northwest and where people fish for halibut. But you can buy them and you can put them right behind like a Islander, Express, or a Cruiser. The bigger ones, they fit perfectly behind there. Like a 10-0 7691 hook. That hook seems to work the best in that bait. And then on the standard Islanders, what works really well is a Kalin's 9-inch grub. They have both of these are curly tail grubs, and I like to trim the skirts back anywhere from 1 inch to 2 inches to kind of give a little bit more of that tail hanging out the back of the bait. You control them fast. They hold up to multiple fish bites. They're a little bit cheaper than ballyhoo, and you don't have any waste. You go out and buy 200 ballyhoo for a weekend of fishing, and fishing slow, you end up throwing away half of them a lot of times. This, you don't use them, just pack them up, back up in your tackle bag and ready to use them next time.
Man, Angelo's dropping some secrets on here, man.
That is something that we used to never tell. The truth is,
some of your friends are really upset right now.
Won't even do that. So
that's really interesting, though, and a really awesome tip, because that is one of the biggest frustrations, especially like right now when you're talking about this sargassum bloom that we've got. I saw something on the Weather Channel the other day that this thing is like extending all the way from Africa up to, right off the Gulf Coast, and say it's the largest recorded sargassum bloom ever. So, really? I mean, it's just there's more grass in the Gulf than there ever has been right now. And, it's so frustrating when you're out there trying to troll. So you mentioned earlier, Angelo, a specific type of head that works better for the high speeds and kind of sheds that grass better. And you mentioned the Islanders. Is there? Talk to me a little bit about that.
A standard Islander, what we would call a chrome dome, a pointed bait. That bait snags a lot of grass because it's offset and it's not a really popping head. Like, we still pull them, and like when it's really grassy, I like to pull them in front of a bird. It just, for whatever reason, it tends to help a little. But what kind of head style works really good, whether you're going to pull Islanders or Moldcrafts, or you're going to go pull, a true lure like a black bard or Macara, whoever you like to pull, Marla Magic, is a pill, like a flat head, kind of a pill bottle head shape. That sheds grass really well. Macara pulling lures makes it's like a yap style head, like a frictor yap. A frictor makes a yap, that kind of longer head, but it's offset and flat in the center. Those pull really well. And cup-shaped lures, in my opinion, catch a little bit more grass when we have a lot of scattered grass. So I like a flat-shaped head in that situation. It just seems like you can shed the grass a little bit better.
Really cool.
That's good. And I want to go back to where you're talking about just being able to go faster and cover more water, and that's the name of the game. I mean, there's a lot of times in the inshore world where making a little bit further cast puts more fish in the boat. Or in my case, like in the summertime fishing where we'll fish like the rigs and the lighthouse and other deep structure, where having a nice current where you can just open your bail and just feed line to your slip cork and just drift it for basically till it's out of sight, versus having slow current where it's just taking forever to cover that water. Just takes a lot longer to catch those fish, and that was a good point that you made there.
Well, and on the flip side of that, we 4th of July, that Thursday we fished the Blue Marlin World Cup. There wasn't a lot of boats out there fishing, and we had Horn Mountain all to ourselves. And there was a weed line just to the south of it. Sat there all day. It was in the great blue water. There was bait everywhere, and we didn't troll. Maybe we trolled like 10 minutes, but we live baited. We caught one and we lost one. But that situation is we didn't have to cover ground. We were located. We knew where the fish were. So, you kind of play it. I always say fishing's just a handful of tricks, but knowing when to deploy what and how to do it is kind of like the key to it, right?
That's right.
So there's two sides to that. You don't always have to cover a lot of ground, but when you're lure fishing, a lot of times it is about covering ground. And in that case, it worked out really well for us.
Angelo, let's step inshore a little bit and talk about bottom fishing. Snapper season is getting close to being done, and I was able to do a little bit of that this past week, and we had good success. But we were fishing private numbers that don't get fished a lot. How are things over off Orange Beach? Has it started to slow down a little bit?
Well, I mean, one of the things that and you guys have this to some extent, but I think even more, there's just so many more boats per capita over here that like you almost, I call it like a bubble around where you're at. These places by this time of the year have just been hit really hard. A lot of times there's still fish on them, but they're the smart ones. And they've seen a lot of 8-ounce weights dropped on top of their head. They just ain't getting hooked. Or they might have been hooked, and they've wised up to what's going on. So what I like to do and what I grew up doing was really you want to kind of anchor a little up current of that spot. Once these fish get tough to catch, anchor up current and chum back into it. What you'll do is you'll get those fish start to come up out of that spot, and then you can downsize your leader, downsize your hooks, and it does two things. A, it gets fish that might not be eaten, but once they're up away from that spot, you don't have to worry about getting broke off so much. And the nice thing is when you're chumming these spots, very good chance that a cobia comes up or a ling or lemon fish, depending on where you're at in the Gulf of Mexico, and you're going to have a legitimate shot at that fish as well. I mean, I think anybody that fished this past weekend and was fishing public spots, or maybe you had a private spot, but it's been found, the anchoring up current, or like really up on oil rigs as well. There's usually fish there. They just wised up to what's going on.
You mentioned scaling down your tackle. Where do you like to go? I mean, what do you feel like is the right balance between strength and visibility?
For me, like I start a little bit higher and I work my way down. Like I think 60-pound test leader fluorocarbon is a good place to start. And here, red snapper, you don't need a big giant circle hook to hook those fish. And if I don't get cut bites on 60, I go down to 50. If I can't get a bite on 50, I'll go down to 40. 40 to me is kind of like you start getting below 40-pound test, you start running against issues of just breaking fish off.
Sure.
But you can go down to about 30. You get much below 30, you're going to have more losses than you are wins. And, I think for a majority of us, there's some people that still have some really good snapper spots. I think for the majority of people that fish out here, they're fishing public spots. And heck, we have the greatest public reef system in the world. You got to get a little bit creative kind of toward at this point in the season. Those fish have just wised up. And I'll tell you another thing that I really think plays into it, and I can tell you it definitely played into our fishing 4th of July, was like, you guys published this, but the major and minor feeding times, I mean, that is key to whether you're deer hunting or fishing. I'm not a turkey hunter, so I can't speak to that. but definitely deer hunting and definitely fishing. Both the fish we hooked on the 4th, the minors were, and we couldn't, the way the tournament was set up, you couldn't start fishing until 8:30 in the morning. You had to quit fishing at 4:30 in the afternoon. But we caught the very end and the very beginning of each feeding time, and that's exactly when we got our bites. We didn't get any bites in between.
Patrick, do you put much thought or effort into paying attention to, moon phases and feeding times?
What I do is I will take a look at it usually in the morning and kind of make a mental note that, hey, from say 7:30 to 9:30 is a major feeding time, and I need to be in a position where I feel most confident in where my fish are going to feed.
Yeah, because you've kind of got, if you're taking a 4 or 6 hour chart or whatever it is, you're going to go during a certain period of time, so it doesn't really matter. But, we've got a couple of feeding charts in the back of Great Days Outdoors magazine that if that magazine doesn't get to people's doorsteps on the 1st of the month, we get bombarded with phone calls.
Because they don't have their feeding table?
They don't have their table, their chart, and because they live and die by it. And, we've even had people tell us that they can watch their bird feeder, and when the major feeding time hits, like, birds come to, like, just show up at the bird feeder.
Yep.
So I do believe that there's absolutely something to it.
There's a lot of value to it for sure.
And, Angela, I was talking with Thomas Hilton, Real-Time Navigator, and they have that same feature on there as well, and there's a lot of guys that really believe in that too. So it's obviously something to it for sure.
There's something to it, but like Patrick said, like, we're not going to not fish because we're not going to be out there during the majors and minors.
Right.
Like, you fish are still going to bite, but I'm like Patrick. Like, if I know at this point right here that there's a damn good chance that I'm going to get a bite, well, guess what? I want to make sure that I'm in that position to take advantage of that, because we talk about this all the time. And, a lot of times a fishing trip is made in 1 to 3 hours of the total time you're out there fishing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
so
no doubt.
If you're out in the middle of nowhere running around while that's happening, you're not going to be, chances are you're going to have more often than not strike out or not be quite as successful as what you could have been.
Yeah.
Yep.
I sure do like it when those 1 to 3 hours come right off the bat, though, and you just got the pressure off.
All right, boys, let's pack it in.
Yeah.
It ain't going to get any better.
Right. Well, Angela, I want to ask you. I want to ask you about snapper fishing a little bit more. When we were out there, Friday, I believe, and we were fishing. We were catching, pretty much every drop, and then we had some porpoises or dolphins show up, and the bite immediately stopped. And that's not uncommon to see that. Now, what we were able to do was we just waited it out. We dropped all our baits to the bottom. We picked up a few fish that were hanging close to the reef, and we were able to wait it out and eventually get our rest of our limit. I guess they moved on or whatever. But what do you do in that scenario when you've got dolphins show up and you're fishing? Do you move on immediately? Do you stick it out? What do you think's the right play?
Let me tell you, I think one of the traits of a fisherman is patience. A good fisherman's patient, but also you got to know when to hold them and when to fold them, right?
Right.
And you look at your options. If you got a couple spots nearby, why not go check them out?
Right.
If the bite's shut off because there's a predator around, those fish, like you said, you dropped down the bottom and caught some fish. They're holding tight. Mm-hmm. They're trying not to become somebody else's dinner at that point. But I can tell you, like we're talking about traits of a fisherman and being patient. This also you got some optimism. But once you start losing optimism on your boat, it becomes like a mutiny situation almost. People start drinking a little bit more, eating sandwiches.
All right.
They ain't quite fishing. So, you're fishing your chance of success goes down. If you got something close by, go check it out. You can always come back later.
Yeah, it's like,
there was fish there. You weren't catching them. Maybe the dolphin will move off when you move off.
Correlation is not causation. Like, you're going, oh, we're not catching any fish. It's like, well, now there's one person fishing, and we did have 6 people fishing. Everybody's checking their phones and, checking out what Dar Sizzle's doing on Instagram.
Because the fish quit biting.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Angelo, tell us about the listing of the week, man. What you got going on at eXp Realty?
Man, let me tell you, we're going to be bringing a really nice one to market over at Harbor Cove. We are going to go get it appraised, so I don't have a really good price on it just yet. 3-bedroom, 3-bath. I'm thinking somewhere around $440, $445. Great south-facing views. Let me tell you, like anybody that's kind of like bought property or somewhat savvy on like buying property near the coast, especially here where we face north or south typically on our coast. Man, facing south is so nice. You get that afternoon sea breeze that kind of cools you off. And then in the winter, if you like, a lot of people, me included, since I live at the beach, I like to be facing south so I don't get blasted by a cold front. It becomes unbearable to be outside. So, this particular property is going to have great views looking right out Perdido Pass. Going to be south-facing views, big balcony, and, somewhere in the mid-4s. It'll be priced correctly. I think it comes with a boat slip, boat lift, the whole 9 yards. And it'll be a nice turnkey property for somebody to have. Outside of that, look, get at me through Facebook, the Coastal Connection. Just look that up on Facebook. And if you have any questions, 850-287-3440 or my email, angelo@thecoastalconnection.com. Guys, I appreciate it as always. I love sharing some knowledge. I love talking to you boys.
Well, Angelo, thanks, man. I can't believe you shared your tuna trick with everybody, but whoever sells these halibut grubs is about to get a
Christmas
present.
And they don't even know that I've been doing this.
Yeah, you just need to call them up and say, hey, listen,
it's about to happen.
Right.
It's about to go down.
I do accept referrals, with free halibut grubs. Oh, well, cool, man. Really cool.
Stock in boneyard baits is about to go up.
All right, Angelo. Well,
Nice.
We'll check in with you soon, buddy. Thanks a lot.
Thanks
All
a lot,
right, man,
Angelo.
y'all have a good one.
See you, bud.
That's some really cool tips by Angelo.
Man,
Patrick.
Angelo's always dumping some really, really good knowledge out there.
Yeah.
He's one of the few that just really opens up and gives the best of the best.
Somewhere Angelo's friends are like getting really angry at him.
But when is he going to run out, though?
Well, maybe he's got
an endless supply.
The real question is, what's he not telling us?
That's true.
Yeah, I've had a little bit of blowback from the podcast, but I can't believe you told people that, or we try not to give away spots and have people fishing on top of each other. But man, I think so much of that stuff is like what Angelo said was key. I think is you can have a bag of tricks, but you still got to know when to deploy it.
Yeah.
And just because you've heard of something doesn't mean that you're going to know when's the right time to use it. And if you don't use it at the right time and it doesn't work, then you say, doesn't work.
That's right.
So you still got to fish. You still got to put in the time.
Yep. It's no different than inshore fishing. I know guys that have been fishing for the last 20 years and have never caught a trout on topwater. Mm-hmm. They've said they've thrown topwater and never had any luck, so they quit throwing topwater.
Right.
But yet there's a whole bunch of anglers that catch trout on topwater all the time.
Right. It's a lot of it's confidence. Well, hey, I want to step back to the snapper fishing a little bit because you fish pretty much exclusively public spots, right?
Yeah, that's all I fish is public.
And I think most of our listeners are fishing at least some of the time. They're fishing public spots, if not all the time, fishing public spots. And one of the things I don't think we hit on is that a lot of times your bigger fish, which are going to be your more experienced fish, are going to hang up higher in the water column. Everybody thinks the reef, and you got to fish right next to the reef. But over the years, we've caught way more big, if you're talking about red snapper, we've caught way more big red snapper fishing on what we call flatline, which may have a 1 ounce lead or 2 1 ounce leads and throwing that way off the reef behind the boat, letting it kind of naturally sink through the water. You may be catching that fish 20 feet under the surface, and I think a lot of folks miss that. They want to be right on top of that reef, and, they've got big gear. Sometimes scaling down your gear, if you'll step away from that reef a little bit, like Angelo was saying, fish up current of it, you can scale down because that fish isn't going to immediately take you into the wreck.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see on the public ground you're fishing? What do you need to do? Are you having to scale your tackle down?
Actually, I had to go up in the tackle a little bit because of some of the further into the season that things have gone, the fish seem to be getting a little bit tighter to the structure as far as just getting numbers in the boat.
Mm-hmm.
However, most of the big fish that have ever come aboard my boat, whether we caught it on a rig or a reef, are typically way away from the structure, whether it's way above it or way away from it. We caught one that was just shy of 25 pounds, 6 miles offshore back in June, and it was when I hit the remote and turned it off anchor mode. We drifted probably 100 feet or so away from the structure, away from the core school of fish, and then my guys hooked up, and I look at, and I'm like, well, there's no fish under the boat. And then I look at my spot. We have already moved 100 feet from the spot, and he just hooks up with the biggest fish that's ever come aboard my boat.
Yeah.
And this is a really close to shoreline type fishing. And I sent my mom and stepdad to a spot. As I talked, they sent me a tip the other day about trout on the beach, so I sent them to an area that had been productive for us on the reefs. And one of the first baits my mom drops down, they were off the reef a little bit. She had dropped it to the bottom, picked it up, and she caught her 25-pound snapper. And this is one of the first reefs you come to from the beach, and 25-pound snapper. But she was off the wreck. It wasn't right there against it. And then once she hooked it, they said it actually swam away from the wreck.
Sure.
And,
it's a bigger fish, and they're not predated upon as heavily as those smaller fish are. Yeah. They're not as scared to be out in the open water.
That's right.
That's my hypothesis, anyway.
I think it's very true that that there's far less concern of them being preyed upon than a fish that's, say, 10 pounds or smaller. That is an easy meal for a dolphin.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's take it inshore.
Let's see what Richard's got to say.
Let's see what old Captain Blood's got to say. What you say, Captain Blood?
What's going on, fellas? How's Outcast treating y'all?
Overwhelming at the moment.
Yeah.
Trying to get it all going. Meet the right people.
Patrick's just trying to finish up this podcast so he can get to the happy hours.
Yeah, happy hour is upon us, sir.
That's the real art of iCast. Is there's 19 happy hours happening at the same time. So how can you capitalize?
That's right.
You got to be quick on your feet.
Right.
Yep.
That's a big place y'all are in.
Man, it's amazing. We talked about it a little earlier in the show, but it's a really just neat to see all these different businesses all being supported by the fishing industry, and it gets back to what you and Bobby and Patrick all talk about, on the inshore side of things, is how much those fish, how much putting those fish back really matters to industry as a whole, and making sure that we got these stocks in good shape. Before we get into the fishing report, what are you hearing about this bacteria? The kind of the nasty water over in Mississippi, it reminds me of what South Florida was going through last year with the red tide. What are you hearing, and what are you seeing there on the Alabama Gulf Coast?
Man, we're already starting to see a little bit of it. I was out today, and I was all the way down almost to the Mississippi-Alabama state line, and I would say I saw a little bit of what I call dirty water. I didn't see anything alarming on my end today, but the water's definitely already an off color, for what it should be right now, given our rain, the local rain and whatnot we've had in Alabama. I would say it's not typical of what I should be seeing. I did not see anything alarming to me, but I've heard reports of seeing some kind of like pea soup looking colored water, kind of a green, red, nasty looking water in the north part of the Mississippi Sound and whatnot. And And, we've already seen some of this earlier this year because they've had that spillway open for so long. I've already seen a bunch of that. And, of course, the fishing was okay through that. Man, it sounds like it's not about to get any better. It sounds like it's about to get worse. And I don't know, always trying to look at the positive side of things. This tropical storm deal that we got coming to the northern Gulf, hopefully it might clean that up for us a little bit. We'll get some fresh rain in here, maybe flush out some of the tidal rivers, and a bunch of southeast wind and high water might help flush some of that stuff out of here and cool the water temperature off too, which will help the bite. You know what I mean? Especially in shallow water. So I don't know, just trying to be positive. Try not to be too negative about what we're about to face, because it could go real bad. But I'd like to see a positive side of it. You know what I'm saying?
Well, Richard, I'd have to agree on one positive aspect of it is going to be that water temperature. When I fished on Monday and it was 90 to 92 degrees everywhere from Mississippi Sound to Weeks Bay. And that just grows all kind of funk in itself, and just some rain to knock that water temperature from 92 down to like 85 or 84 where it should be, or where it could be this time of year. Man, it just seems like the fish respond so well to it. So I'm with you. I'm like on the optimism side of things, and that this tropical storm comes in and cools things down and makes it better.
Yeah, I tell you something interesting about that water temperature deal, and I don't know if it has anything to do with that dirty water coming out of Mississippi or not, but today I was fishing the Gulf Beach, and I made a real long wade, and we were wade fishing. I made a real long wade, and then I got back. We got out of the water and walked about a mile back to the boat, and when I got back in the water to go out to the boat, it was significantly cooler, and we got back in the boat and started fishing from the boat, the same area we just waded, and gotten it was really kind of what I call a trashy bite, like a lot of bluefish and ladyfish and stuff. And heck, we got back in the boat and started fishing some of the same area from the boat. And man, it was crazy. The bite really cleaned up a lot. I've got to assume that's what'll happen with the rain coming in as well, and hopefully cooling some of that water off. Hopefully that'll make it turn on for a lot of different areas,
Richard, I want to back you up on two things. So, number one, you brought up tropical storm. I want to go on record. I didn't bring that up. But what's that going to do with the fishing tournament this weekend? Do you guys have a plan yet? Are y'all just going to watch it and wait and see?
Yeah, well, there's really not a whole lot anybody can do about the weather. You know what I'm saying? So what our plan to do is to sit and wait and watch. As of now, the fishing tournament, the Young Anglers tournament is still on. It's still a go. We're fishing this weekend as far as everybody is concerned on the JC side. And then we're gonna watch very closely and make a call probably late Thursday or early Friday morning as to whether we're gonna fish or not, and I would just look for that on social media outlets, at the Alabama VC Fishing Rodeo Facebook page and website, and then of course we're in contact with news channels as well, because they're concerned and already calling us and asking questions as well.
Right.
So I would watch the news and look on social media to find what we're going to do. But as of now, we are a go 100%. We're hoping that this thing's going to miss us. You just never know what these things are going to do. And, a bunch of us kind of feel like it's, we're no matter what we do, we're going to make the wrong decision, but we're going to try to make the safest decision that we can, for our young anglers.
That's all you can do, Richard. I mean, just like you and I, every single morning when we have 70% chance of rain, if we start making calls on whether or not we're going to go fishing the night before or say 4 days in advance because of a forecast, we'd dang near go broke in the summertime, because there's so many days where we wake up in the morning and it's raining to the north of the bay, and we can fish for 4, 5, 6 hours in the south end of the bay before it ever starts raining. Yeah, it's going to rain that day, but there's a good chance we'll be able to get it in.
That's right. Well, I just want everybody who's listening to know that safety is definitely our concern, and I think what we're going to lean on is if there's a tropical storm warning or hurricane warning, we definitely won't be fishing. But otherwise, we are, because we don't want to have to reschedule this thing, and because that's going to be a disaster for people taking vacations, coming from out of town, and everything. It's going to be a disaster trying to reschedule it, if we even decide to reschedule it. Is kind of what we're kind of getting at this point. So,
Richard,
anywho, we're trying to be optimistic.
All right, I'm gonna back you up for the other thing now. So you mentioned wading and then getting back in the boat and drifting that same area. We wade because we want to cut down on hull slap and the noises that we're making in the boat, right? We're trying to be stealthy.
That's it.
So when you go back and you do decide, all right, let's drift the beach and let's use the boat. Talk to me about positioning the boat and what you use to maybe give yourself a landmark. One of the things I've always struggled with is, like, if I'm looking at a featureless beach, let's say, seemingly featureless beach, I might have that first trough. Where do you position that boat? Are you trying to position it so that your casts are, the longest cast you can make is where you think the fish are? Do you look for a certain depth, 4 to 6 feet of water? Where are you trying to put that boat so that you can minimize the amount of commotion you're making when drifting the beach?
Man, that's a great question, and that's something that I live and die by. When I'm fishing from the boat, and what I will always say is I use the wind to my advantage. I always have the wind to my back. Pretty much anytime I'm fishing, I'm always going to have the wind to my back to where I'm casting. I'm not going to fight the wind. You're not going to win against the wind. Trying to cast into the wind or trying to fish into the wind, you're not going to win 90% of the time. So, like today, we have a northeast wind, so of course I set ourselves up to the east of where I was going to fish, and I drifted to the west,
Mm-hmm.
And today's a bad example because the fish are just chewing the rod tips off. It was just I think, like I was telling y'all a while ago, I probably had about the top 4 or 5 guide trip I've had of the year this morning. Wading plus jumping in the boat and just doing the exact same thing from the boat that we did while we were wade fishing. It definitely sounds like the fish are just absolutely on the chew right now. And it's not just around Dauphin Island where I fish. I got a great Eastern Shore report. I got a great report from Fort Morgan this morning from guys who just had some incredible catches. The fish are definitely on the chew right now. They're in a good mood, thank goodness. But I always use the wind to my advantage to where I can make the longest cast possible, and then to back up a little bit on the type of structure and stuff you're fishing, we're definitely fishing sandbars, drop-offs, holes, stuff like that on the beach. So you just basically want to get out on that beach and look for imperfections, you know what I mean? Not just a naked long beach with nothing on it, no sandbar, no hole, no anything like that. You want to ride along the beach until you see some type of imperfection in the beach, where you have, I always tell people my favorite thing is to find deep water right against the shore. Anytime you can find deep water right against the shore, and I say deep water, that means 4 or 5 feet right up against the bank. That's usually money that's usually money.
I love it. So I know you're talking about fishing the Gulf beaches, and you said the trout bite was awesome. What are you keying in on? What are they keyed in on? Is it a finfish bite? Are you able to go artificial?
Man, today I'm pretty sure I could have threaded a piece of bubble gum onto a jig head and caught a fish. You know what I mean? But it's been a great mix of both. But I have seen it both ways. Here recently, let's say the past 2 weeks, where it's like a croaker bite, and hard to get them to eat a slick lure, like a mullet imitation or a pokey imitation, and they want that croaker. They're mad at that croaker. I don't know what makes speckled trout so mad at croakers to want to eat them so well, but I've definitely seen both sides of it, where they're just chewing the rod tips off of everything, and then where all they want is the croaker. The problem right now is that it's warming up so much that the bite's starting to get trashy. You're starting to get a lot of, man, I bet I probably tied on about 20 hooks and leaders on Monday, and then today I had the same guys today that I had on Monday, and I kind of coached them up a little bit and said, hey, keep a little bit more tension on your croaker, and you start feeling that little machine gun on the end of your rod tip, reel it away from them. You know what I mean? So you're not losing a hook and a leader every time. And then of course I stayed on artificial most of the day. And of course, I was catching plenty of bluefish on my top water this morning, but I was kind of watching closely, and I could tell when it was top water, when it was a bluefish versus a speckled trout, And so if I saw kind of a bluefish deal going on, I'd snatch my top water away, so I wasn't reeling in a bluefish. And then, your next cast right in the same little area, you could definitely tell it was more of a trout bite, and you could kind of leave it in there a little bit longer and hope to get a speckled trout versus a bluefish. So there's ways to combat the trash, getting shark bit and getting bluefish bit and whatnot. It's tough, and you just gotta buckle your mind down a little bit that there's a bunch of fish there, and do a little combat fishing.
Richard, I saw a really big triple tail you guys caught last week. It looked like last week or the week before. I was able to get out and do a little bit of that myself, and most of the fish we found were on floating debris. Very few fish on structure that we found. I'm not saying they're not there. What about you? The triple tail you're catching, are you finding a lot of it on floating debris, or does it seem like those fish are holding on structure?
Man, it's mostly been like that giant that we call, it was 25-pounder. That we caught. It was 30 inches long. It was a freaking fish of a lifetime. So I think it was number 3 in my life as far as size of fish. We caught him under a tide line, under a piece of little tiny piece of grass that couldn't have been bigger than maybe it looked like a little piece of marsh grass with a little small root and maybe like 3 or 4 little stems coming off of it that were not even 2 foot long. And
it's the root. You gotta find the one that's got the root. It's always they like that root hanging down. I'm telling you,
it had like a little piece of root on there. But I mean, and that was out in the Gulf of Mexico. That wasn't in the bay. It was only like a couple of miles off the beach there at Dauphin Island. And it's funny you asked me that question because I stop and look at every single tide line. When I'm out that way, I stop and look at every single one of them, until I run out of something to look at.
Yeah. And
I definitely lately have been keying in more on the ones with structure in them, with either the pieces of grass, the pieces of like little sticks and stems and pine straw and whatever floats in a tide line. Definitely like more of a piece of structure that they were hanging on. I think I probably spent maybe 45 minutes to an hour today looking at tide lines that had nothing but just foam in them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
2 beautiful currents that are pushed together, clean water on one side, dirty water on the other. And I idled them for a long time and never saw a single thing, and that's kind of got to a point where I was like, I don't want to look at this anymore. There's no trash in it. There's no grass. There's not any kind of any kind of cover for the fish. So that's kind of what they're doing now. But of course, I'll never ignore any of them because earlier in the year, I talked about this on the show earlier in the year. I got on tide lines with little to no trash and caught bunches of fish, that were just free swimming in the tide line,
yeah, we saw one like that last week.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say to ignore the ones with nothing in them. I'm always going to stop and look and give it plenty of time.
And I think a big part of that too is that the tide line you see today is not the tide line that was there yesterday. I can't say like, hey Richard, go out to the dead catfish and take a left and it'll be the 4th piece of grass. Whereas if you're in the middle of the ship channel, those pylons and buoys have been hit, like guaranteed they've been hit this week. So a lot of that I think is just fish that are out there that nobody's messing with.
Yeah, man, I could talk about that for a little bit too. Talk to a lot of guys, a lot of fishermen who are like diehard black fishermen. You know what I mean? That's all they want to do in life is blackfish. You know, and their name of their game is hitting channel marker poles, channel marker buoys, hitting structure stuff, and they kind of get a little irritated these days because there's a lot more people doing it.
Yep.
And they'll say, "Man, it's not any fun anymore because every time you go, there's guys on there's somebody on every single pole in the ship channel, you know." And I mean, I'm not catching any more or less fish than I was before, but I'm adapting. You know what I mean? I'm keeping my eyes peeled for those tide lines and for floating logs or floating pieces of trash or, you know, like all the shrimping that's going on right now. The guys throw their little salt bags in the water, you know, and you find there's stuff like that.
There's no fish under salt bags.
All right. Well, Richard, good stuff, man. We've got you for the Hey Cap question this week. This week's Hey Cap sponsor is Foster Contracting, your fortified roofing pros. Patrick, you know what I love about this podcast, man, is we've got really niche local knowledge, but we're able to broadcast it across the world. Yep. I mean, we're right there next to the biggest names in podcasting, but we can take something that is really hyper local and really pertinent information for the anglers that are fishing right there along the Alabama Gulf Coast, but all the conveniences and professionalism that comes from, you know, being able to have it sound good and be on your phone and all that. And, you know, I think a lot of times with everybody wants to support small businesses and local businesses, but one of the issues is that when you're dealing with a small business, a lot of times you miss out on the professionalism that you get with the larger companies. And that's really not the case when you're dealing with the guys at Fortified Roofing Pros. They're a family-owned business that is big enough to get the job done, but small enough to care. So, guys, if you're looking for quality construction with a dependable, licensed, and certified fortified roofing professional, give the Fortified Roofing Pros a call at 251-973-9999. Remember to support the local businesses that make this podcast possible, and check them out at fortifiedroofingpros.com. Richard, you brought up a tropical storm. Now I'm talking about roof repairs. I hope we're not, you know, calling up a storm here. And guys, if y'all need if you do need a new roof and you're thinking about it, call them up and tell them you want a 75% discount because you heard about it on this podcast. They're not going to give it to you, but just tell them that anyway. Maybe you'll get lucky, you know, give it a shot. But no, guys, check them out. That's a newest sponsor for the Alabama Saltwater Fishing Report. We really appreciate the support over there at Fortified Roofing Pros. All right, the Hey Cap question this week, Richard, comes from Matt Broussard. He emailed us at alabama@bestfishingreport.com, and he's going to be getting 10 entries into the Sea Deck Ruler giveaway. You can check that out at greatdaysoutdoors.com/giveaway. All right, Matt asks, he says, I'm relatively new to fishing the bay. I don't get out often enough to get a good feel for what the bait does throughout the year. I hear from everyone, find the shrimp, mullet, pogies, etc., and you'll find the trout, redfish. Can you give some insight into what the big bait movements are in and out of the bay during the spring, summer, and fall? So let's try to break that down into something manageable here, Richard. What do you think? What are some big bait movements specifically for trout and redfish that Matt can key in on?
And the biggest one I think about is shrimp migrations. We'll just start with fall and go from fall, okay? So late summer, early fall, seems like the shrimp move up into the Mobile Delta, Mobile Tensalt Delta up there above the causeway and whatnot. They move into Dog River. They move into Fowl River. I've seen it seen it with my own two eyes. You know, just loads of shrimp in these estuaries up there. And I feel like that time of the year, the speckled trout and the redfish are just right behind them. You know what I mean? I don't know what makes them go in there, but I assume it's forage. And then they go in there, and then as the cold fronts, and they live in there, and they live on a shrimp diet, and as the cold fronts come through in the fall and winter time, the shrimp start to flush out of there. You know, the cold temperatures make the shrimp flush out, of those estuaries, and the fish seem to go nuts over that. That's when you see lots of big bird schools and stuff like that. You have these big falling tides, and the trout and the redfish will get up underneath the shrimp, push them to the surface, and you see bird activity and whatnot. And then through the winter, I feel like they go more into a finfish diet. More mullet and small pokey diet. And then coming into spring, you just see our brown shrimp start to come back into the bay, and then they'll start to get back on shrimp real good again. Of course, the fish fall out of all the rivers and all the estuaries and whatnot into open water, into down around Dauphin Island and Fort Morgan and the whole 9 yards, and then they're going to live on shrimp through most of the summer. And then what I typically see is that once we get into like late July, August, September time frame, we call late summer, early fall, they get more on a finfish diet, where we're catching more fish on live croakers and pogies and mullet and stuff like that, and then the whole thing recycles again. The white shrimp make their migration into the rivers and whatnot, and then of course the other thing we see the pogies move around a lot too. There's a lot of pogies all over the place right now in the mouths of all the rivers and down around Dauphin Island behind the fort, and then behind on the north side of Fort Morgan Beach and whatnot. So that's kind of my best answer to that as far as I could tell.
I like it. Yeah. I think the big key, what you just said there, is pertinent to right now, is that right now is when we're moving into that finfish period, and you better be prepared to cast net or shrimp net up some croakers or some pogies, or get to the bait shop first, because they usually go pretty quick.
Yep.
That's right. And like I think something I said when we were kind of discussing this offline before we got on was I know 100 different instances where I can think of late summer, which we're starting to kind of get into, late summer pattern where these fish get off of shrimp and onto finfish, where you can make a drift with a shrimp and not get touched in a certain area, and then throw a live pogie or a live croaker in there and just start crushing fish. I mean, just as fast as you can get them in the water type of deal.
And it's the same, and then you get the reciprocating event in the wintertime too.
That's right.
Where you'll have the guys where we're in the rivers, or we're in the canals or wherever, throwing grubs or mirror lures or slicks or whatever, and catching trout, and the guy that went to the bait shop and bought live shrimp that morning, he's struggling to get a bite.
That's exactly right. So I think we've talked about this before. You know what I mean? You gotta match the hatch. You gotta pay attention to the signs, see what's going on. There's a zillion finfish around. That's what you want to be throwing. If you're not seeing any kind of shrimp activity, I know a lot of times when I'm on a bite or in an area, I'm seeing shrimp like slip across the water, and that's paying attention to the fine details of what you're doing. Is just keeping your eyes open and keep scanning the water. I tell people all the time, anytime I'm around water, I'm doing nothing but scan the water. I don't care if I'm on a guide trip or if I'm eating dinner at the Bluegill. I'm looking at that water and I'm reading it, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on in the water.
You and me both, brother.
You kind of got to get yourself to that point, where you're really picking up on the little small details there, and it'll take you a long way. It's amazing.
All right, well, Richard, man, I hope y'all have some good weather this weekend for the Young Anglers Tournament. That's always an awesome event. I know folks are getting excited for the rodeo coming up, and you're a big part of that. So wish you good luck. Hope you have a good fishing week after this little weather event moves through, and just stay safe out there, buddy.
Thank you, sir. Y'all have a good time down there in ICAST, and make sure you tell everyone I said hello.
Will do.
Yeah, bud. See
All
ya.
right.
Well, Patrick, we got offshore, we got inshore. That leaves our guys onshore. Let's go talk to Dusty Hayes and see what's been happening in the surf. Dusty.
What's up, guys?
Hey, Dusty.
Number one, tell us where where you guide, where you focus on geographically for the folks that don't know, and go ahead and tell us too, if they want to get in touch with you, how to do that, and then tell me what you've been catching.
Yeah, absolutely. As far as the best way to reach me is just call or text me on my phone. It's 678-897-0167. And then also too, for my surf fishing, it's Shore Thing Fishing on Facebook. And it's SHORE, not SURE. But
clever.
As far as my surf fishing goes, though, I really focus on the Orange Beach area. That's where I grew up. That's like my home stretch. I do fish Gulf Shores and West Beach and, towards Fort Morgan some, but not as often. Pretty much from the Flora Bama to, the state park and Gulf Shores is that's my honey hole. I know all those beaches. I fish them all year. It's really my confidence area. And this time of year, it does get tough over there, but you can catch fish if you know how. I've been catching a lot of fish the past couple of weeks on the beach out there. You can go a few different ways. As far as how to approach, most people surf fishing get on the whole 2-drop, 1-drop rig, which we preach most of the year, and yet still works this time of year. But it doesn't do as productive. I'll only put like maybe 1 or 2 rods out in a rod holder this time of year, and just throw a piece of shrimp or sand flea out, and you'll still pick up some pompano. You'll still pick up whiting or a black drum or something like that, but predominantly, I use little small jigs and fish up close, very, very close to the shore, and catch whiting, you'll catch flounder, you'll catch redfish, you'll catch black drum, all kinds of stuff. And another big thing, too, early, and actually the past week and a half, 2 weeks, there's been a lot of bait up on the beach. And you'll have fish that are, what ladyfish and bluefish and Spanish mackerel even right up on the beach. That are schooled up chasing these little glass minnows and blood minnows that we have, and they are very easy to catch with anything small like a half-ounce spoon or something like that looks like a minnow. So early in the morning, there's that route, and then as you get a later morning, a lot of people, like I said, I'll do most people will try to do the bait and weight stuff. That works fine. It's not as productive though. I'll notice that if I put 1 or 2 rods out, they might sit out there for 30 minutes before they even get touched. A lot of times it's a stingray or a catfish. Some mornings are better than others, but that's usually the case. And then another thing you can do too is shark fish. There's a lot of sharks off the beach. I always tell everybody just make sure you're careful, fish with respect. A lot of people, they pull them up and they take pictures of them for 20 minutes and all that. I'll pull them up, take a picture, pull the hook out, throw them in the water. I try to make it less than a minute and a half. I have them out of the water. There's tons of sharks. You have small spinner sharks, you got black tips, and Atlantic sharpnose. The Atlantic sharpnose you'll catch this time of year. You'll catch them on shrimp, sand fleas, fish bites, lures. And there's actually been schools of them. I mean, you can sit there and watch 10 or 12 of them go by as you're sitting there on the beach. And they're actually really, really good eating. I can't remember what the size limit is on them, but they do have the minimum size length. But I think it's 2 per person, and they're very good to eat. And
let me stop you right there. A lot of the devil's in the details when it comes to fish and what people say. Oh, that's good eating, or no, that it's not good eating, or whatever. But a lot of the detail is really how you handle them the moment you catch them. And I've seen it time and time again. Patrick, when we caught sheep's head this past spring, we were out there with Hank Shaw, and we bled a few of those fish and then didn't bleed some fish, and we bled some of all the bluefish. But the difference in the meat at the fish cleaning table was, and it was a killer dock fish cleaning table, by the way.
Yes, it was.
But the difference in the meat was spectacular from the fish that had been bled versus not.
That's
and
right.
The taste of
Absolutely.
bluefish that have been bled. So what do you like to do with those sharks? Because that's something I do not have really any experience other than Mako's. I don't have any experience eating sharks.
I've heard a few different things. I know, like a lot of the black tips and stuff, a lot of people gut them, and they'll pull, I guess there's these 2 veins that go along the spine that they urinate through, that goes to their meat and to their skin. Do not quote me on that. I don't know exactly. I'm not into killing big sharks. I don't care for it. I just soon let them go. Now, those Atlantic sharpnose, I do kill, and usually what I'll do is I'll cut their tail off, and they'll bleed through there, and then I'll just soak them, in water. But I do that with all my fish. I'll put some water in there and I put a lot of ice, and I do it like a chill kill style, where that fish is as cold as possible. And from what I've learned is the colder that cooler is, the colder those fish are when you clean them, the firmer that meat will be, and the more when it gets cold, that blood contracts in their organs, it stays in their organs. It doesn't clean. It's not as messy when you clean them. Like bull reds and sheep's head. You'll clean that first side, and it's real nice and not that bloody. And then you get to that other side, and it's a mess. And especially if it's like the last fish or two you caught on the end of the trip, they're real soft and they're bloody and they're slimy and all that. But if you really let them get super, super cold, and that's why that water helps. It's not just that ice touching the fish, that them sitting in that really cold water chills the whole body out. And it's hard to do this time of year because it's so hot, but it chills the whole body out and really puts all that blood back in their organs, and they're not as bloody when you clean them. But especially on the mackerel and bluefish, if you bleed them out, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, the slurry
same with the sharks.
The slurry makes a really big difference, and if you can use some seawater, just some salt water, that helps. That helps get the temperature down some, and you don't want it to be a sloshing slurry. Like if you were carrying that cooler,
mostly ice.
It needs to be mostly ice, but it needs to be I will say loose enough that you could push the fish down into it without any resistance, but not so much that if the boat was rocking or you were carrying that cooler, it shouldn't even hardly slosh side to side. But salt is a big part of that too. Using salt water, or heck, just if you've got water and ice, just grab a cheap thing of salt and sprinkle it over that. It'll really help get that temperature down. I just didn't know if there was any tricks to the shark game, but it sounds like it's pretty much the same thing. Kill them quick, bleed them, get them cold as fast as possible.
Yeah, that's what I do. And that's another thing to keep in mind too when you're talking about killing big sharks. And it's not like we had ice 100 years ago or 200 years ago when people were eating this stuff. So obviously you don't have to get in the freezer right away, but that's something to keep in mind too. A lot of people want to kill these big sharks and stuff off the beach, and I'm like, okay, well, what
are you going to do
bring with you to put that in? So especially if you get one right off the bat and you plan on killing it, I hope you're going home soon this time of year, because that thing's going to be hot quick for sure.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Some people will catch a big fish and then not have the means to be able to handle it or take care of it, and when they should just, because they're not prepared, they should just go ahead and turn the fish loose.
So Dusty, on the surf side of things, it sounds like just about anything can be caught right now, but I've noticed it looks like the pompano are in pretty good numbers right now. Is there anything we can do? I mean, pompano's kind of that iconic surf fish. Is there anything we can do right now to key in on them?
Yeah, you'll see a lot of guys catch them on lures and stuff. Not, I wouldn't say specifically, but I do know people that have caught tons in the warmer months while they're trout fishing on twitch baits like mirror lures and whipping slashes and whatnot. Another thing that's real popular is, people just try different baits, try shrimp, try ghost shrimp, try sand fleas. Same as springtime, just move around. Those fish will change their diet, even ghost shrimp. They're going to change their diet constantly, and it's no different than April when they're running. One day it's like ghost shrimp, and the next day the guy using sand fleas next to you is catching 10 and you ain't got a bite. So it's changing, having varieties of baits and just kind of being prepared for anything. There's tons of small pompano in the surf right now. I'll say it because I don't know if anybody else ever does, but you got to treat those little guys with respect and care. People just cast net. I watch guys throw cast nets on hundreds of them and get them all sucked in the gills and then putting them on a hook. And it's just like, you're sitting there scratching your head trying to figure out what you want to do because, they think it's just a bait fish because they're little silver guys. But there's tons of them out there in the surf this year. And you can use back to the little jig head thing and catch tons of those little guys just to have something to pull on the hook. I like using a thin wire hook for them though, if you're going to do that. So you don't really just eyeballs in their mouths, but you'll catch them a variety of ways. I catch them just fishing free line and little baits up close, and you'll see people catching them on set rigs and stuff. A lot of it's location. You'll see them more in one area than another. I know there's been a lot caught further to the west, and I have caught a couple decent ones, in the Orange Beach area, but not as many keepers, but a lot of small ones too. So They're definitely out and about, and you'll see bursts of them. Like you'll notice, I know Matthew, past 2 days has been catching a lot of them. And, we'll see bursts of them like in July, and then you'll see like another big run of them in August. And a lot of times in August, you'll get some monsters that come through here.
Well, I'm glad you brought it up about the cast net situation, and because one of my worst experiences on the beach was throwing a cast net. We were just out blind throwing the cast net, and exactly what you just described, we probably netted 150 small pompano in a cast net.
Oh.
And it was just one of those things. And most of them lived because I knew what had happened, as soon as I pulled the net up. But it's just something to be careful of. As a lot of people listen to this show that are coming from out of town, they may not even know that they've got pompano in that net. But just be real careful of that, because that's I don't know. That bothered me really bad when that happened.
It's one of those things where, like you were saying earlier, not being prepared and not having the means to handle that fish and, knowing what to do with it at that point. It's the same thing with people that keep fish and don't know what they are.
Right.
Like if you don't know what it is, you shouldn't be keeping it. And also, too, like for bait purposes, not just eating purposes, put it in the cooler, but for bait. Like I used to work at a tackle store, and people would come in there in the mornings, mostly this time of year, and it was tourists that didn't know any better. And they would have, like I had one guy who he brought his bucket back there and was already had water, and he's like, "Oh, I got some bait fish in there." He's like, "Don't pull them out." I was like, "Okay, I'll put some shrimp in there with them." And he had about 24 pompano in there, and I was like, "Hey man," I was like, "You got to take these back. Go let them go across the street, and I'll get you some shrimp."
Yeah.
And he got all upset. I was like, "You can't do that." I was like, that's basically you're keeping an undersized fish. I mean, you can get a fat ticket for that.
Right.
That's right.
They think just because they're a juvenile that doesn't count, but I mean they're just technically keeping an undersized illegal fish, and it's
and
just,
over the limit.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
exactly.
I bet a day doesn't go by that on social media I don't see a "what kind of fish" post is this, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But there's plenty of resources out there, apps. I mean, the Outdoor Alabama app has a little pocket ranger on there that has all the limits and size limits and of every kind of fish that is regulated. There's other apps out there that will tell you can take a picture of it, you can look it up, and it'll tell you what kind of fish it is. And like you said, if you don't know what it is, then you need to let it go. You don't need to kill it to find out what it is. More than likely, that's going to end up in a bad situation. So check out some of those apps.
For the fish,
yeah.
You should do a little bit of research. Saying you got to sit down and know every fish that swims in the Gulf, because I mean there's still stuff that everybody doesn't know and all that. But if you're going to go fish off the beach or something and have the means of keeping something, you should at least brush up and have a basic idea.
Well, since you gave your number out on here, we'll just tell people to call you whenever they can't figure out what kind of fish they've got.
No, please don't do that.
Text all the pictures of fish that you don't know to Dusty.
All right, Dusty, we got to get the inshore tip from you. It's brought to us this week by Killer Dock, and everybody knows by this point that I have suffered very, very brutally from dock dysfunction for many, many years.
But you have had some relief.
I've recently gotten some relief, and it's felt great. In all seriousness, I mean, most of the fish cleaning tables that we're dealing with they're dirty, they're nasty, they're wooden, they're cracked, they're warped. These things, the negative angle is the thing I love the most about the Killer Dock. It takes all that slime and all of that fish grime and nastiness, and it pulls it away from you without any work. So it's naturally draining away from you. The second thing I really like about them is they're built so that they're built out over the water. So all that stuff that's coming out off the fish cleaning table, whether you've got, the model that drains through the legs, or you got the model that drains through the slot, it's going into the water. It's not going on to the dock. So you're not standing on fish slime.
Yep.
And I'm telling you'll never have a cleaner fish cleaning experience than you will on the Killer Dock. They've got the canopies that go over the top of them to keep you out of the sun. This time of year, one of the bad parts about last week's vacation was it was brutally hot. I mean, brutal. So, staying out of the sun, they've got really anything you could want when it comes to enhancing your dock and upgrading your fish cleaning experience. So, guys, check out Killer Dock at killerdock.com. They've got the greatest fish cleaning stations known to mankind. All right, Dusty, what you got for an onshore tip?
All right. So as far as tip goes, I would recommend this time of year, and it's something that works pretty much from now until the end of summer, even all the way through almost winter. When you get these really calm days like we've had the past few mornings, the north winds or no wind, it's, less than a foot of surf. You can use a light jig head. And I'll say a light jig head, something small like you would use like a plastic for crappie fishing, 16th ounce or 8th ounce, something very small. No specific one. If you can get one with a sturdier hook, that's great. You don't necessarily want a big hook, but a stout hook works good. Thin wire hook works just as good too, though. Definitely get better hookups with that thin wire hook. On that, you'll put a small piece of shrimp, small sand fleas, or fish bites works great. If you get into these whiting and pompano and redfish or drum you may be catching on these jigs and you're catching them consistently, fish bites works good. You're not having to burn through as much shrimp by any means. You're definitely saving bait, and it's something you can just catch fish after fish on. A real light rod works perfect for this. Ultralights, little brim rods, Zebcos, whatever, nothing special. And you're casting from here, maybe 5 yards from the shoreline at most, 10 yards absolutely max, right off the beach. And all these whiting, juvenile whiting, and some big whiting too, and pompano, everything from 2 inches to 15, 16-inch pompano you'll catch just right on the beach on these little jig heads. Light rod, light leader, you don't need anything. I usually use 15-pound fluorocarbon. If it's kind of dirty, if it's really clear, I'll go down to 8. And sometimes lighter than that. Most of the time you don't need to. If you're getting into more toothy fish, you can bump it up to 20, but you don't have too much of an issue with that. Throwing right off the beach, just a couple feet, and you can even sight fish a lot of these fish. You'll see a bunch of the whiting right there in the waves, right up close. You can wait out as the day goes on and throw out that way. And like I said, you're seeing a lot of these fish today. And, a few redfish, and they're on just cruising the beach, and they're just looking for sand fleas or doing what they're doing. And we would pitch these little jig heads with a little piece of shrimp up ahead of them, and they would just go right to it and twitch it, and boom. So all kinds of little special or just kind of extra fish right on the beach, on the shoreline, that you can sight fish for. And on dirty days you may not necessarily see them, but they're there. And a lot of times on that set rig rod, your pompano rigs and all that, that you won't get touched. And we caught a lot of fish yesterday that swam right by our set rig rods and wouldn't touch them, but on that little jig head, it looked like a little clam or a little sand flea, and they just couldn't resist it, so it's
sounds like scale it down and fish close to the shore is what you need to be doing right now as we get into the heat of the summer.
Absolutely. And even like I said, even through fall, that method works really good. I've used that all the way to November and even December, and it works. It's deadly on whiting all year, like I said, especially summer and fall, but you'll catch other stuff too. Keeper pompano. It doesn't have to be a big rod at all. You can use 6-8 pound mainline, or I use 15-pound braid with a 15-pound fluorocarbon leader, about 4 foot long, and that works fantastic.
Excellent.
I like it.
Well, Dusty, thanks for the contribution this week, man. I hope you can stay cooled off and get out there and get after them. I know you do a little bit of inshore fishing too over there as well, so we'll check back in with you soon, man. Have a good week.
See you,
all right,
Dusty.
guys. See y'all. Thank you.
Man, I tell you what, if you're not fishing from the surf some and you're not getting out on the pier, you're missing a big part of angling along the Gulf Coast. There's something to be said. If I'm gonna catch a speckled trout, I want to catch him. I want to be in the water with him. It's just a different experience. I just enjoy it more. I'm not saying I don't like catching them off boats, but I like being in the water. Same thing goes for being on the beach. It's a different setup. It's a different, you got to have a little bit different gear. But man, like when you want to stop fishing, you just stop. Like there's no, you got to walk back to the vehicle. You don't have to put the boat on the trailer. And it's great. Bring your family out. You don't, if somebody's out there and they're not really into fishing, they can jump in the water. They can
That's right.
build a sandcastle, drink a beer, whatever it is. I really enjoy that surf fishing. One of the things we didn't really get to with Dusty is that the tarpon. We'll try to get you guys a tarpon report next week because those fish are schooling right now.
Yeah, we definitely need to hear from somebody about some tarpon
off our beaches, and Spanish mackerel is really good right now. If you can get to the pier, those fish are around and be prepared. So hopefully we get to talk to David Thornton next week. We'll see how it goes with the storm blowing in. Patrick, what are you thinking for the rest of ICAST, man?
Rest of ICAST, I've got a list, several notebooks deep of folks that I need to go see and want to talk to. See about, running into some of these popular fishermen and shaking their hands and stuff. It's a cool experience down here. But, let's wrap this thing up, Joe. What did you learn today?
Man, I think the theme of the show was really being in the strike zone. If you think back to what Angelo said, he talked about they changed their baits out. So they went from a dead bait to an artificial bait, and they sped up their trolling speed, and they go to a different shaped lure to minimize the amount of grass that they're catching on their lures. All three of those things equate to keeping baits in the water longer and or covering more ground with those baits. Richard Rutland, what does he talk about? When he's drifting a beach, he's always going to set up to be able to be with the wind and bomb those casts. Why? So, if you're going to make 100 casts in the morning, if you're making a 50-yard cast and I'm making a 75-yard cast, again, just throwing numbers out there. But if we're doing that, I'm going to catch more fish because I'm in the strike zone longer than you are. And then same thing with Dusty. He's talking about, everybody would get used to, all right, I'm going to get my set rigs out there. But what he's saying is you can put those set rigs out there, but the fish are right there up next to the beach. And he's just observing that, and he's keeping his bait where the fish are in the strike zone for longer. And we've all been there. I'm usually the one that's out fishing everybody.
I'm sure.
But, we've all been there where you're on the boat and your buddy is just spanking your butt. He's out fishing you. Just same bait, nothing's different. Never happened to me, but it's you've been there. We've all been there. And why is that? Well, that guy's in the strike zone longer. Do you see that a lot on your trips?
I do. I see it. I see it quite often when we're fishing popping corks and slip corks. The slip cork guy can always hurt himself by not allowing that bait to drift and drift with the current. The guy that's throwing the popping cork and working it too fast, not necessarily like frequency. Well, I guess it kind of is frequency of pops. So pop it, let it sit. You got to visualize that shrimp. I always tell people that when they pop it, just expect that shrimp to come all the way up near the surface and for it to sink all the way back down. So using, say, a 24 to 30-inch leader, it takes a couple seconds for that shrimp to settle all the way back down. The guy or gal that's on my boat that is a little bit more patient and willing to let that bait settle back down is usually the one that's going to outcatch the guy that is almost constantly retrieving. He or she is almost always winding the reel just a little bit and then pop it, keep reeling, pop it. Well, the cork never settles, so the bait is always up out of the strike zone and never getting to the strike zone, and then they end up getting outfished by everybody else.
Well, and I'm convinced women are better fishermen than men. They're more patient.
Yep.
I really believe that.
It happens a lot on my boat.
It happens to me every single time I take my wife out. But now, and back to something that you said during the show, Angelo brought up the moon phases and the feeding times, and what you were talking about is being somewhere that you're confident in during that feeding time. And how many times, for the folks that aren't paying attention to that, heck, man, maybe they're running around moving from spot to spot during the prime feeding time. And that's, again, it gets back to not being in the strike zone as much as the guy next to you. So
that's right.
That's what I learned today.
Yep. Well, I like it.
Maximize the strike zone.
I like it.
All right, folks, that's going to wrap it up this week from ICAST 2019. Thanks for listening. Thanks for subscribing. And thanks, most importantly, for reviewing us on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. We really appreciate the reviews. Really appreciate all the kind words you guys have given us there, and it really helps the show a lot when you do that. So please review us wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like us to email you the show each week, just head to greatdaysoutdoors.com/ASFR and jump on our email list, and we'll send you the show each week. Y'all keep whacking.
I've got one more. I've got one shout out for Mike Trotter. He chartered me last week. He had his family in town. We took him out, and he's an active listener, so appreciate it, Mike, and hope to see you again soon, buddy, and thanks for listening.
Thanks, Mike. All right, folks, y'all have a good, safe weekend, and keep whacking them.
This week's Alabama Saltwater Fishing Report has been brought to you by
Coastal Conservation Association of Alabama. Check them out at ccaalabama.org.
Also brought to you by Geico. Call Ron Davis, Geico agent at 251-445-0053 or visit him online at geico.com/mobile-al. Also brought to you by
and also A-Team Fishing Adventures. Check them out online at www.ateamfishing.com or contact them at 251-661-7696. This week's Alabama Saltwater Fishing Report is brought to you by the Alabama Marine Resources Division. They remind all recreational anglers one snapper check vessel report is to be submitted before red snapper are landed in Alabama. For more information about the snapper check, please visit outdooralabama.com. This week's Alabama Saltwater Fishing Report was brought to you by me, Joe Baya, and National Land Realty. If I can help you in any way with purchase or sale of land in Alabama or Florida, whether it's timberland, farmland, recreational land like hunting land, or even agricultural land or ranch land like horse farm, drop me a message at jbaya@nationalland.com. That's JBAYA@nationalland.com.
Also, Ugly Fishing Charters with Captain Patrick Armisen. You can check us out at uglyfishing.com or call us at 251-747-1554.